That is a galvanized garbage can, the kind you would put at the end of a driveway. It is bolted to the front of a working farm tractor. Underneath it is a small metal drum. The fittings holding it together are ordinary plumbing parts from a hardware store, and the grate inside it is a stainless steel mixing bowl. That tractor runs, not on gasoline, not on diesel, on wood chips and nothing else. And the instructions for building it were written, paid for, and published by the United States federal government, which then said almost nothing about them for more than 30 years. I want to be careful here because there is a serious catch to this technology, and I am going to give you the whole of it before this video ends. It killed people. It is genuinely dangerous when it is done carelessly, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. But the reason the government wrote this manual at all comes down to one man. And once you know who he was and what he was actually doing during the years he learned to build these things, the entire document reads differently. We will get to him. First, the part you can test yourself in your own kitchen in about 4 seconds. Welcome to Forgotten Roots. The vault opens today. Light a wooden match. Hold it sideways, horizontal, and look closely at what happens. The wood does not burn, it turns black, it becomes charcoal. And then look at the gap. There is a small space between the end of the matchstick and where the bright flame actually sits. The wood is in one place, the fire is in another place, and between them, there is a gap of nothing. Except it is not nothing. That gap is full of gas. The wood is releasing it. The gas travels a short distance, and only then, once it mixes with the oxygen in the room, does it ignite. You are not watching wood burn. You have never watched wood burn. You are watching a gas burn that the wood is producing. That gas has a name. It is called wood gas or producer gas, and by weight, it runs about 20% hydrogen and 20% carbon monoxide, with small amounts of methane. The other 50 to 60% is nitrogen, which does not burn at all and just takes up room. Now here is the number that reframes every fire you have ever built. When you burn wood in a stove or a fireplace, you capture about 1/3 of the energy in that wood. 1/3. The other 2/3 goes up the chimney with the smoke and out into the sky. Every wood fire in human history has thrown away most of its fuel. Gasification is not a new fuel. It is not an invention. It is just a method of catching the smoke before it escapes, cleaning it, and feeding it to an engine instead of to the sky. Which raises an obvious question. If it is that simple, and the physics have been sitting inside every campfire since the beginning, why is this not how everything works? It was. That is the part that gets left out. Go back to around 1790 in Europe. People were already making combustible gas out of coal and wood on an industrial scale. It lit the streets. It was piped directly into houses for heating, for lighting, for cooking. Factories ran their steam boilers on it. Farmers ran their machinery on it. By 1840, it was routine for heat. By 1884, it had been adapted in England to run engines. This was not fringe technology. This was the infrastructure. Entire cities ran on gas made from wood and coal, and they ran on it for the better part of a century. Then, in 1859, someone found a very large amount of petroleum in Pennsylvania, and the world simply left. Oil was cheaper. Oil was more convenient. You did not have to make it. You pumped it out of the ground already liquid. Within a few decades, thousands of gasworks all over the world were dismantled and scrapped. Remember that, because it is going to happen a second time. And the second time it happens, the people forgetting have far less excuse. Because 80 years later, Europe needed it back, immediately. When the war closed off oil transport across Europe, Civilian populations in occupied and blockaded countries were cut off from petroleum almost overnight. Not rationed, cut off. And the people who lost fuel first were the ones who made the greatest advances in getting engines running without it. I want you to guess how far one country took this. Occupied Denmark. Farm machinery, tractors, trucks, stationary engines, fishing boats, ferry boats. What percentage of all of it ended up running on wood gas? 95%. Not the tractors, not the trucks. All of it. 95% of everything with an engine in a country under occupation was running on wood and charcoal, converted by ordinary mechanics with ordinary tools. Neutral Sweden, which was not even occupied, reached 40% of all motor traffic. Across Europe, Asia, and Australia, millions of these units were in operation between 1940 and 1946. The commonly cited figure is around 1 million gasifiers running at the peak. An entire continent kept its food moving, its boats fishing, and its farms working on a fuel that grows out of the ground by itself. And then oil came back, and within about a year, almost every one of those units was scrapped. Now, I want to be honest about why, because this is the point where a lesser video would tell you an oil company did it, and that is not what happened. They were abandoned for 3 ordinary reasons. The efficiency is low, the operation is inconvenient, and the fumes are genuinely dangerous. Those are real drawbacks, and nobody had to be bribed to notice them. Then gasoline came back at 15 cents a gallon, and that was the end of the argument. There was no ban, no lobby, no hearing. 1 million working machines were dismantled because the alternative got cheap, and within a generation, the knowledge of how to build them had mostly walked out of living memory with the men who had done it. Except in a few places. Charcoal-burning taxis were still running in Korea as late as 1970, and in 1984, someone inside the American government looked at all of this and got quietly nervous. Here is the reasoning, and it is stated plainly in the document itself. The United States has never faced a prolonged or severe oil shortage. Because of that, America lagged far behind Europe and Asia in even being familiar with this technology. But a catastrophe could disrupt petroleum supply badly enough that this might become critical to essential economic activity, specifically named the production and distribution of food. So the Federal Emergency Management Agency commissioned a manual. The work was carried out through Oak Ridge National Laboratory under an interagency agreement, and the finished report was published in March of 1989. It is not a policy paper. It is not a study. It is a build guide. It contains step-by-step fabrication procedures, illustrations, and photographs, written explicitly for use by any mechanic who is reasonably proficient in metal fabrication or engine repair. The stated goal is to get tractors, trucks, and other vehicles operating without delay if a severe liquid fuel emergency arises. The design is deliberately humble. It calls for materials that would still be widely available in the United States during a prolonged petroleum crisis, which is why the body is a garbage can, the base is a small drum, and the grate is a mixing bowl. It is built to run 4-cylinder gasoline engines rated from 10 to 150 horsepower. A diesel engine can run mostly on wood gas too, with a small amount of diesel injected just for ignition. And they did not just draw it, they built the prototype, bolted it to the front of a gasoline farm tractor, ran it on wood chips alone, and photographed the whole assembly and the field test so you could see it working. Your government paid for that, printed it, and put it on a shelf. Now the catch. I promised you the whole of it, and here it is, because this is the part that actually matters if you ever intend to touch this. Wood gas is roughly 1/5 carbon monoxide by weight. That is not a contaminant. That is the fuel. Carbon monoxide is what you are making on purpose, and carbon monoxide is odorless, colorless, and kills people in enclosed spaces every single year. FEMA's own manual is blunt about this. Aside from the obvious fire hazard, carbon monoxide poisoning is described as the major potential hazard during normal operation of these units, and it calls out two moments specifically: refueling and prolonged idling in poorly ventilated areas, which means a shed is not a workshop for this. A garage with the door open is not ventilation. The early symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning are a headache, drowsiness, and nausea. And by the time you are drowsy, your judgment about whether to walk outside is already impaired. The second problem is tear. As the gas cools, it drops condensate loaded with organic compounds, and that tar is cumulative. It gums up filters, it fouls valves, and if your filtration is inadequate, it will progressively destroy the engine you are trying to save. The third is simply power. Wood gas carries less energy per volume than gasoline, so expect somewhere between a 30 and 50% reduction in horsepower. If you need 5 kilowatts out of a generator, you are converting a 10 kilowatt unit to get there. None of that is a reason the technology is fake. Denmark ran on it, but every one of those Danish mechanics was accepting a machine that was slower, dirtier, more work, and capable of killing them if they got careless. They accepted it because the alternative was a farm that did not run at all. Which brings us back to the man who wrote the manual. His name was Harry Lafontaine. He prepared the construction guide for FEMA, assisted by F.P. Zimmerman at Oak Ridge. And according to the foreword written by a colleague of his, Lafontaine was uniquely qualified for the job, for a reason that has nothing to do with engineering credentials. He was Danish. He lived through the occupation. And he built and operated wood gas generators during the war in the daytime, as cover. Because at night, Harry Lafontaine was working for the Danish underground. The gasifiers were his day job. The reason he was allowed to be seen with tools and fuel and trucks, and a legitimate reason to move around an occupied country, was that he was one of the men keeping the machines running. 40 years later, an American federal agency asked him to write down everything he had learned, in case a country he was not born in ever needed it. He wrote it down. They published it. And then almost nobody read it for 35 years. That is the whole story, and there is no villain anywhere in it. Nobody buried this. Nobody bought the patent. The document has been publicly available this entire time, and it was paid for with tax money. It was just cheaper to forget, which is the thing worth sitting with. We did not lose this knowledge because it was taken. We lost it because gasoline hit 15 cents a gallon, and remembering stopped being worth the trouble. That is how most knowledge actually disappears. Not seized, just quietly not worth the effort, right up until the morning it is. So how much else did we put down for the same reason and never pick back up? If this vault opened something for you, subscribe to Forgotten Roots and hit the bell. Every share keeps this knowledge alive. The next vault opens soon.